Hi, this is Bruce Rawles, and once again, I'm talking with Susan Dugan, and as always, about A Course in Miracles. Today, we thought it would be interesting to talk about, uh, I suppose, a pair of closely related topics. One is level confusion, and the other is why A Course in Miracles isn't a, quote, New Age system or philosophy. And Susan sent me an article that I'd read, very short, from Foundation for A Course in Miracles that goes over 5 talking points about why A Course in Miracles is not New Age. And maybe we could start with those. Does that sound good?
Yeah, sure. And maybe just introduce it a little bit, but the you know, and if you hear this little weird noise, it's my dog is on the floor snoring. So
Oh,
that's what that. It's not me making that noise, really.
okay.
So yeah, the course is always real. Is very unique, and we were talking about this before we started recording. That it it is a very non-dualistic teaching, even though it meets us as it says in the condition we think we're in, which is as embodied creatures and duking it out for survival in a world of bodies. But the course's metaphysics is very, and maybe I'll just kind of state that creation myth of the courses that explains them is very, very different, because it's really saying that the world is a defense against the truth, that we really, that our reality, our non-dualistic reality, our undifferentiated oneness, as union with God as the one child of God, is abstract and really is ongoing, and nothing has happened to change that. But that the way the course explains what we're experiencing, that seems to be other than that, is that into that one mind there arose a tiny mad idea at which the one child of God forgot to laugh. And so it's really that we took it seriously, we believed it, and it was really that passing, fleeting desire, and question of what would it be like to be other than this, separate from maybe we could make something better, have more fun, and of course nothing really happened as a result of that. It was just a silly idea and an impossible idea, but because we believed it, we sort of plunged ourselves into excruciating guilt over that, and then believed that we had to come up with this entire defense.
And kept that guilt from our conscious mind with
Right, and then covered it
profoundly
up. Yeah,
complex mechanisms. Yeah.
right. So we projected that whole thought out into a universe of seeming all these distinct entities and assumed bodies, in which we're all trying to prove that we really do exist apart from God, but it's not our fault. And in so doing, we also, part of that whole ego strategy, the part of our mind that really wanted to go forward with this plan, was we call the ego. And as part of that strategy was to forget that we even had a mind, so to repress the entire thing. And so now we're in what the course likens to this dream, and but within the we're not aware that we're dreaming, and so everything here is opposite to that oneness in heaven, which is all loving and completely innocent, and we created in our mind as well an unloving God that knew about this and is now in our deeply dreaming psychosis, is now sort of after us in our psychologically, and so we believe is after us to destroy us. So we're all at our core trying to assert the same relative innocence, relative to prove that we are less guilty. We all feel excruciating guilt as a result, and we don't know where it's coming from, but we think it's coming from everything outside of us, everything that's been done to us, and then the fact that we have to retaliate, which makes us feel guilty. And so the course takes, before we kind of go into these, how the course is different, the course really, from the course's perspective, the world is an illusion. It's made up. It's a dream, and there's no point in trying to fix or change the dream. and that change at that level, and that's the level that we seem to be experiencing, which can called level 2. Level 1 is our oneness in heaven, but level 2 is what we're experiencing or seem to be experiencing in the dream, and all of that is really a defense against the truth, in which we're driven again to try to differentiate ourselves to feel relatively less guilty before we're killed for it, because now we're mortal in the dream, and or to try to substitute for that lack that we feel. So we're constantly needy, and basically joining with others to get right in our special relationships. We're always trying to fill that need in some way. And we do that individually, we do that collectively, we do that as nations, we do that as organizations and governments, and in every venue that we seem to be involved in, every interaction. That's really our underlying agenda. Everybody has the same agenda.
Yeah, the what's in it for me
yeah,
scenario. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Different expressions, but that's part of the deception too. It doesn't. It's all the same.
Well,
So,
just thinking about what you just shared eloquently and succinctly and in great with great clarity, I would say that probably 99% of what you just shared seems quite foreign. I kind of put my new age, reminiscent hat on, having gone through the metaphysical spiritual buffet line a few decades ago before I got into the course, and kind of dabbled into it again after that until I finally, I think it was Gary Renard's books that finally just like, oh, wait a minute, this can't work.
right.
And the metaphysical buffet line, as you will, the new age level confusion / new age approach to fixing the world and making that be our proposed solution, and all the things you were sharing, that whole cosmology and ontology is basically saying this isn't going to work on the level of form. If we start there, we might have some occasional byproducts as a result of tuning into the level of the mind with help from the Holy Spirit, that seem to make our experience in the world better, but that isn't the idea. In fact, what's one of the very I think core premises of the course is, if we can keep cause and effect from being reversed, which is part of the level of confusion.
Right.
We're not going to be at the mercy of the world, rather than we can be merciful to it,
Right.
by recognizing it's just a projection. Yeah.
Right. The course is not against us doing things in the world, or using what it calls magic, which is really trying to fix a problem at the level that it really is not, which is in the world, in the body. But and in fact it really, as long as we believe we're bodies, it would be very unkind, and we're cautioned against trying to not be normal and do normal things and use whatever magic, which would include going to the doctor or an alternative practitioner, or crystals. I mean, if we're going to go into new age things, or something that works for you too, that makes you feel better. I mean, I do a Qigong practice in the morning. That's a sound healing practice that I find very calming to my body. Is it healing my mind? Probably not, but it has a very nice, it brings into its practice the thought of including everyone, which I find very, compatible with the course. But it's not it's magic, it's to soothe and calm my emotional and physical body. And at that level, it's a way of being kind to ourselves. So there's nothing wrong with any of that. There's nothing wrong with, going door to door for a candidate, and walking precincts, or doing, phone banks, or giving to a charity, and working for a cause that you believe in, or speaking out.
Or checking off lists on a real estate transaction. Or
why did you bring that up?
or finding new web clients, or all the stuff that we do in our everyday lives is just thinking, oh well, let's see, this is how I'm dealing with the world, kind of thing. And the course never suggests that we do anything like that, or stop breathing or eating, or
we have to do those things.
Personal hygiene, or caring for your family, friends, community, and so on, and all the things, being responsible to all the places that expect
to do the normal things.
Just be normal, basically. Exactly.
Be normal, but the idea is to give them a different purpose. So
Exactly.
everything then becomes what the Course calls, and what Ken called, a classroom, in which you're learning a different way of being in the dream, right? Whose goal is now to awaken from the dream rather than root yourself more deeply in the dream. And the way that we do that is that constant questioning of the cause of my reaction. And that's the process, the first step in forgiveness, what the Course calls forgiveness, which is really forgiving my belief that the problem is outside me, that the problem is in the body, in the world, and taking it back to the mind to look at it again, because there's a part of our mind that is always at peace. That's that represented by Jesus, Holy Spirit, and knows that we're dreaming, and can help us, see that it isn't really ever about them. It's this guilt that keeps resurfacing and recycling in our mind. And we first, got in touch with that again, and it scared us so badly that we went out to the world, because that's what we robotically do as when we're identified with the other part of our mind, which is the ego that does believe the lie of separation. So we have a choice between magic or miracles in our approach to things, So even as we're doing magic for our body, we can also recognize that that's a compromise approach.
Right.
And that, it's not really solving the real problem, but I'm too afraid to go directly to the mind for help with the real problem, because the mind is still an enemy. We're developing our trust. We're kind of backing into trusting the mind again through this practice of forgiveness, because we made of it an unloving father. We made of it an unloving mind. Right.
Yeah, that's a good point, and that you bring up, and well, several, but the idea that Course in Miracles is really an indirect process, oftentimes, in terms of dealing with our relationships, and that first step of forgiveness, of basically seeing that it's not out there, very often, and most typically, takes the form of saying it's not this other person or these other people that are the cause of my distress. It's my interpretations of those relationships, and specifically my misinterpretations fostered by ego thinking that is a sabotage of our peace. And if we can kind of look at that without condemnation, without judgment, and just say, oh wow, there's this self-sabotaging part of my mind that if I can just look at this and not blast it, not make a big deal out of it, just kind of watch gently and calmly and see that in action, and just as Ken likes to say, smile at the silliness of it. That begins to erode our identification with that imposter, and that while we're still doing the magic, and that still allows us to not freak out and panic, because if all of our magic were removed, we would it would be a very strange experience, we're not ready for that. Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's really that getting in touch with, it's always my call for love. It's my guilt that,
Exactly.
it's never about the other person, it's always about the people that we've, the characters that we've peopled our dream with as dreamers and writers of the dream. They're going to do what we programmed them to do in the dream, in the mind. They do their things and they have their meltdowns. But what does it have to do with me? And so if I am feeling victimized at any moment, then I know that I've chosen that. And really that's the practice, is getting back to taking responsibility for it, not for their ego meltdown, but for my reaction to it. That's how I know I'm projecting. And they can do. I'm not responsible for. They're doing their own part of the decision-making mind stream, but minds are joined. And when I make the decision to attend to my mind and my projection and take it back, then I'm demonstrating the same power within them to return to their mind too. And so on some level, whether they in that moment appear to have gotten that message or not, all minds receive that message. All decision-making minds are strengthened by any decision by any part of that one mind. So so we don't have to go around fixing other people either, which is a great relief, isn't it?
It really is.
Doesn't
Yeah.
work anyhow.
No, it never does work. I have a little numerical mnemonic. It's sort of an alliteration right there, actually. But and that is, it's half as much effort to be responsible to others as it is to be for them.
Oh, very nice.
I mean, it's a little bit of a stretch linguistically there, but in other words, if we realize that we don't have to fix the dream, including anyone else, and like you say, it's a very unfulfilling, counterproductive
Right.
thing, because invariably it backfires, not only for the reason that it's not where the problem is.
Right.
And again, getting back to
the
level of confusion as recognizing, the very first step of forgiveness is always it's not about the other. It's always in my own mind.
Right.
And I think that's why I wrote this little article about Marianne Williamson, level of confusion, and of course miracles recently. I put on ACIM blog, and that was one of the ideas. Is it's always and only about the mind, and whenever we start, trying to fix the form, there's nothing wrong with that. But it's not what the Course addresses. It's never about behavior or the outer trappings, basically. Anything involving space and time, which covers a lot of turf, is really not the purview of the Course's curriculum, is it?
Right, and it's not about, the quote from the Course is really, that it's not about seek not to change the world, choose to change your mind about the world. Mm-hmm. And the world really it's not really there. So we're putting an awful lot of energy into trying to fix something that we deliberately set up and don't remember making up, as to be a hateful place, right? So I don't know how to mute this, but I'd like to, so it doesn't answer. So there isn't really any. It's just it's a very empty and meaningless activity because it's never really going to change. It's the world isn't going to be a good place. We made it up. We invented it to be a place of conflict, a place of one or the other. The whole ego thought system at its foundation is about one or the other, and is about someone winning and someone losing the game of who's the less guilty one here.
Yeah, as you're saying that, I was thinking, it really seems like an ongoing process when studying and practicing what's in the Course in Miracles, is seeing that the ego's whole mental landscape is one of desolation. Yeah. And without condemning or hurling epithets or making big deals out of that, just seeing ultimately that desolation really is nothing. It's all a stage production, of high production value theatrics that we've invested our identity in, and we think it's an enormous big deal because it's all the evidence. And you talk to anybody on any street corner and ask if the world's real, and they'll say, well, of course it is. And but this is not the level that Course in Miracles addresses. It's really talking about the decision in the mind that basically suggested that it would be possible to, as you were pointing out in your opening comments, somehow undo the unconscious, unfounded guilt by hiding out as a seemingly separate self in a vast world of immense proportions, and where seemingly we're this little tiny individual at the mercy of the things that are outside of our control. And boy, is that ever convincing. But there's always that awareness that says, my peace of mind is not contingent on the number of items in my web business in basket, or the number of things checked off on my pre-move real estate list, or whether or not political candidates tick all the boxes in on my perfect candidate checklist, or anything out in the world is basically fair game for looking at what the contents of my mind is at any moment. And if I can do that calmly, and listen to that inner kindness teacher and that gentle guidance,
Right.
I'm in a better position to actually be more effective, ironically, in the world, because I'm not invested in the outcome.
Right. 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 Exactly. You're sort of unconditionally loving no matter
Yeah,
what's going on, and
yeah,
you're not seeing it as one or the other. You're not seeing it as someone's wrong and someone's right. Um,
exactly.
just you have a preference, but it's no big deal. So
No big deal. Those are
yeah,
three great words, aren't they?
yeah, and everything is such a big deal to us most of the time.
Yeah, yeah,
So, and we know that's, that if our personal self is invested, it will always be a big deal.
yeah. Hmm.
So, and 99.9% of the time, our personal self is invested, right? Because
Right,
we've
right,
forgotten that we're a mind. And so, the
exactly,
course is really that always trying to get us to become mindful and
exactly,
to step back from our mindlessness, our
exactly.
mindless projections on the world and fascination with trying to manipulate the world back to the mind, back above the battleground, and looking at it differently from a different perspective of inclusiveness. So,
That's it. That's it.
yeah,
And the self that A Course in Miracles is addressing is really the decision making
right.
self,
It's the
which
mind.
really asks us to choose against, not in any condemning way or any kind of divisive or confrontational way, but just look at the lowercase s self, which
Right,
is the personal self, and instead choose the transpersonal self, even though the Course doesn't use that term, to my
right,
knowledge, which is really the all-inclusive identity that we all share and have, and that's at the heart of the challenge of course, and Ken Wapnick points this out in a lot of his talks, is that if we leave anyone out, no matter who it is or what it is, we're missing the point that the perfect oneness that we thought we shattered, really is all inclusive. So if we find ourselves leaving anyone or anything out of our
absolutely.
our
Right,
kind-heartedness, and our in our estimation of the identity of what those people or things really are, we're doing the same to ourselves, and that's just shooting
right,
yourself in the foot if it's all one thing and we're all one
right,
being.
right. Yeah, because it will always we're only hurting ourselves. There's
Yeah.
only one. So
Do you want to go through the points
yeah,
in this?
let's do that. And
There's five comments there that I thought were pretty right on, and I appreciate you.
want to do the first one?
Sure,
Read the first one?
sure. This is from an essay, "Why A Course in Miracles is Not New Age," from the Foundation for A Course in Miracles, that was emailed to subscribers a short while ago, and it says, I'll read the opening remarks here. A Course in Miracles, in many crucial ways, is in sharp disagreement with New Age thinking, with many principles discussed in the book conflicting with many New Age principles. 5 examples of this kind of conflict are as follows. The first one is the theory of A Course in Miracles is based on a non-dualistic metaphysics. It teaches that the physical universe, including the body, was not created by God, and in fact came about as an attack on God. No New Age system would support this. They all teach just the opposite. And I think this is one of the things that I somehow knew was there in my early readings of the Course back in the mid 80s and into the 90s and into the millennium. Uh, I kind of, on some level, kind of knew that was the case, but I didn't really consciously bring it to awareness until I read Gary Renard's first book, and it was like it was spelled out so clearly that God could not have made the world,
Right.
and then it just kind of really hit home, and it's like, well, that really solves everything,
Yeah.
because that really gives us a way out of the the dream that we made up that we think is unsolvable. And
Right.
if God has no cognizance or no identification with duality, and that perfect oneness, to use another, and all that it can be as a label, for that ineffable essence that we all are and share, if that awareness doesn't involve any illusory states that we think of as our material universe and our involvement in it, um, then there is a refuge that is actually what the Course says is our real reality. And we're hiding out in a little tiny speck of a dream
Right.
and
Right.
making a huge big deal out of it.
Right. And there's, there's no, I mean, because really the ego thought system is completely, damned us to hell in a sense. I mean, there's, that we came up with a whole elaborate biblical story and idea of why that happened, and we may have got a larger ego, a more powerful ego that recognizes all of this, and that that judges the worthiness of us to return to heaven or not, and but also punishes in horrible ways, and sometimes ways that completely defy understanding of any of ostensible guilt. So we've created this God as basically something that, to me, as growing up, I always felt like what they're asking us to do is impossible. To have no unkind thoughts, to have no, I mean, it really was it just seemed completely impossible.
Mm-hmm.
I knew I was going to never make it to heaven because, I just can't do this.
Damned if you do, damned if you
Right.
don't. Yeah,
I'm just
exactly.
not going to be good enough.
Uh-huh.
So really, I mean, this is such a more loving approach of just saying God doesn't know. And when I recognized that in the Course pretty quickly on, it was such a relief,
Oh,
because,
for sure, for sure.
God doesn't know about this, and
Right,
that because the question was always, well, what kind of God would do these things and take children and cause horrible natural disasters and wars and all the things that we attributed to this God. And so so it's so reassuring in that sense, but it's very different. It's completely outside anything that again, 99.9% of the world supports in one way or another, at least culturally.
Yeah, yeah. And I would suggest that includes pretty much any formal religion, including Christianity, as well as almost all New Age thought, with rare exceptions.
Secular approaches,
Yeah,
veganism and all of it. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, because A Course in Miracles squarely head on addresses the unconscious, unfounded guilt and how to disentangle ourselves from it by forgiveness, and not too many other approaches that I've run across address guilt as the pivotal causal, the root cause of all of our suffering.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So number 2 in this list that Ken had come up with, which is so succinct and
it is yeah, exactly.
So another way, this is number 2, and how the Course differs from New Age teachings. A Course in Miracles does not support the thinking involved in, quote, prosperity consciousness, a prominent principle in New Age thought systems. So that whole idea of law of attraction and trying to manifest abundance in your life and prosperity, and that I can create, I can magically somehow entice more money into my life and more happiness, abundance, whatever. That's again, that would be about trying to make a better body, a better self, personal self, a better life for that personal self. But underlying that always is also really the idea implicit that it's one or the other, because if in the world that we've created, if I gain, others, there's a finite amount of resources. So always there would be that the guilt is going to still be there.
Right. Exactly. Just the whole premise of otherness really is at the core of the unconscious guilt, because as long, and this is another area where the word consciousness, I know this is sort of a technical issue, but
it's not a good word in the
consciousness is the Course puts it, is really a concoction or a fabrication of the ego, because consciousness always involves a subject and an object, which implies duality. And so again, this is just a
other than God.
Exactly, a semantic thing. But I like to use the word awareness, because we can be aware in a way that includes all and everyone. And that's really the awareness that A Course in Miracles is reminding us that we can return to by removing the blocks to that awareness of love's presence, by forgiving every seeming thing that's outside,
Right.
apparently bringing it back inside and then asking for our inner kindness teacher's help to say, okay, is
Yeah.
this working? Not so much.
Right.
Was it real? Not so much. No, it didn't really happen in the truth of eternity, and that's where our real being is. But we need to look at those ephemeral things, and that's becomes our classroom for getting back to the mind. And
And really challenging, you know, our unkind thoughts, our excluding thoughts, our, wanting our selfishness,
yeah,
because
yeah,
really you know, it was a very selfish thought to believe that we could create a world, a self that was better than God,
right, right,
and there's tremendous guilt involved when we feel that way. And so really to become aware that, so anytime I'm excluding someone, in my mind, or really putting my interests always front and center, rather than realizing that everyone has needs and we're really the same in that. That's something that we're asked to become really vigilant about looking at and being honest about, not condemning ourselves for, because everybody does that.
right, right.
Wouldn't That's why we come.
Yeah, exactly.
But to just begin to be really honest about it and say,
Yeah,
this is hurting me. It's
right.
really it's just really not serving me. It's not the direction I want to go.
Right. And I think at some point that level of confusion that we all practice of wanting to make the world work
Right.
for us at the expense of, and that whole divisive thinking, just looking at that, again, without condemnation,
Right.
is really pivotally important to get us back to our minds and say, okay, that isn't working. So what's left? Then we have the shared interest,
Right.
that it is the shared identity that reveals itself beyond the differences. And before we started this recording, Susan and I were talking about the recent political debates, and how looking at 10 people up on a stage, and being in a situation that really almost fosters divisiveness and
Of course. Yeah.
highlights differences
Right.
and a dualistic thinking, instead of saying, at least, what if we took the amalgam of all the great ideas that each of these candidates has,
Right.
and or more importantly, what if we take everyone's best interest, and then if you really take that further, kind of the 5 whys approach that I learned in my process improvement lifetime a few years back,
Right.
uh, and just kind of really, get deeper and deeper into the why do we need this to work, why do we need that to work, and how could this work better, and really, if we look at the principle of shared interest that is in particularly the manual for teachers, along with trusting Holy Spirit, as Ken points out, that idea of shared interest taken to the limit really is basically, the shared interest that we all have is waking up from the dream of
Right.
separation and our belief in the unconscious unfounded guilt. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
That's our one need, is to find our way
yeah,
home. Right.
exactly. And that takes a myriad of forms, and there's nothing wrong with using the forms. And again, that's why we don't need to beat ourselves up when we use the magic and
Right.
participate in the level of confusion practices that we all do. Is just, if we can just kind of smile at it a little bit more each time.
Be aware of what we're doing,
Exactly,
and that
exactly,
we're too afraid to go directly. So that's okay.
exactly.
But you want to read the next one?
Sure. In almost all New Age systems, there is an overriding emphasis on people's positive experiences, with scant lip service paid to the overwhelming unconscious feelings of guilt shared by most
Mm.
people. We've already kind of been addressing this quite
Yeah.
a bit. A Course in Miracles teaches that there is only one problem in the world, and that is guilt. Therefore, it focuses primarily on our feelings of guilt, teaching us how to identify them and undo them. And again, this is
So important. Yeah.
not something that most New Age systems touch with a 10
Uh-huh.
or a 3 parsec pole, let alone,
Right.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And really and it was really my biggest problem, I would say, with New Age teachings, because I tried them too and
Oh,
explored them.
oh, for sure.
Yeah.
You're several decades
Yeah.
here too. Yeah,
And I was
absolutely.
in, the Bay Area during the 1980s, and that's what was going on there.
Yeah,
But
same here.
so, but for me, it was, again, the biggest thing that was not working was, none of it got to my feelings of feeling unloved and unloving. And, again, just like what I was talking about with growing up in the Catholic Church, that feeling of, oh, I can never be good enough to do this. I mean, how can I be happy all the time? And, I mean, it felt really false and really, and not really, and there was sort of an underlying blaming the victim that would go on there, where, well, you're just not, you're putting out bad energy, and that's why all these things are happening to you. People said stuff like that.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
So,
Well, like, oh, you're
yeah,
ill, so you had this misfortune financially or biologically
right.
or
It didn't
really.
seem very
So
kind of
you must not be doing things right, yeah, kind of thing.
right. There was always sort of a little bit of judgment going
Yeah.
on.
Oh, yeah, for sure, and sometimes more than a
I
little.
mean, and maybe not for everybody, but that's the way I experienced it.
Sure. Oh no, I think
So,
that's really common. Yeah.
but anyway, the course, the point is that the course, again, is really it's a course in looking at the barriers to love's presence,
Right.
looking at our guilt, looking at the ego, which makes it very, very different from really any other teaching I know. I mean, it has some similarities in its non-dualism to a couple of other teachings,
Mm-hmm.
but it's completely unique in the way that it brings in those psychological components.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
The only other comment I was going to make is it brings up the idea that Course in Miracles students are not exempt from participating in the condemning practice and the judgment. In fact, that really is our opportunity to look at how deeply everyone does this, without exception.
And I do it too.
As individuals, yeah.
And how tempting it is to blame the victim,
right.
and well, look, and to make it, one way that course students do it a lot, I think, is by saying, oh, it's their call for love. Mm-hmm. When really, no, it's my call for love if I'm upset by it. I mean, we're always trying to fix somebody else's ego, and forgetting that this is completely about taking 100% responsibility for my reactions. It has nothing to do with you, So
yeah, we don't generally advocate burning things with lasers on one's retinas, but something that the equivalent might be helpful is this is not their problem, it's my problem. and I have a way to undo the problem by seeing it differently.
Right. So, I mean, one thing that after reading the Song of Prayer and psychotherapy pamphlets, the message that I got was, it's always about and only about the healing of my mind, not anybody else's mind. Mind your own mind, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so, so you just read 3, so I'll go on.
Okay.
Another theme common to many New Age systems is the belief that we are God. A Course in Miracles is emphatic in teaching that we are not God. It teaches that God is our source. We have been created by Him, but we did not create ourselves. Mm-hmm. And really, that was the mistake, that belief that we could create another self, So even though we're seamlessly joined with our Creator, and the Course says there's no place where the Father leaves off and the Son begins as something separate. It's that oneness joined as one, undifferentiated wholeness. Nonetheless, we did not create ourselves, and we are the one child of God.
Exactly.
So
it's both level confusion and the authority problem, and the authority problem being, we think that we made ourselves up, and as the essence of what we are, this is impossible. As the form, we have a convenient excuse and scapegoat, and no, it's our parents that did it to us.
Right.
They took the DNA that junk DNA that we didn't want and threw it together, and now I'm stuck with this
all of these issues.
This thing that now needs Medicare or whatever,
Right. Yeah. Well, and it begins, I mean, our one or the other expression begins, with our family, and our parents are the first ones that don't meet all our needs, because they can't. No one can, and that's the setup. But it's also that distinction that, a lot of New Age teachings, and people, I think, misunderstand the Course, take it out of context, that, that when the Course says, I am as God created me, well, yeah, that's true on level 1. but I'm not aware of that anymore. And I certainly am not, walking around as God on earth right now, or I wouldn't be here. And I
Right.
certainly wouldn't be making the statement that I am as God created me to others, because I would just know that. And so I would be all loving to everyone and very, very quiet and humble about the whole thing. So, it's not, again, that's that level confusion
Right.
of it's not really a kind thing to say, that I am God and I am, I have God's power, yeah.
And it's a mechanism of skipping over steps that
Mm-hmm.
Ken Wapnick refers to frequently.
Yes.
Of if we bypass the classroom that's for us, which is the things that do annoy us and irritate us and are challenging,
Right.
then we're skipping over exactly what we need to return to that awareness,
Right.
and by short-circuiting the forgiveness classroom that's in front of
Right.
us every
And
moment.
by the time we get to the top of the ladder and are in the real world, there's no real separation awareness at all. So even the
Mm-hmm.
idea that I am God kind of all ideas really sort of disappear into the love, the abstract love that we are. There's no need to make that distinction,
Right.
So and we know ourselves as we are. So yeah. But anyway, we can go on probably. We've been talking a pretty long time.
Oh, that's a good one though. That really is, I think,
Yeah.
important. That we didn't make our
Distinction.
we didn't create ourselves. We the world seems to have made us as bodies, but that's again a mistaken identity that we just need to
We
look
are the
at.
dreamer of the dream of the personal self, however,
Mm-hmm,
that
mm-hmm.
we did make up,
Yeah.
and we're waking up all the time by our refusal to wake up.
Right. Exactly.
And our defense of the dream all the time.
Yep. That decision-making mind that decided that duality was possible, at least collectively on some level, we made up this whole thing, and so we are, responsible and complicit for everything that came from that tiny mad idea. Huh? Yeah. But
Exactly.
fortunately, it was a tiny mad idea, and it can be undone.
And it had no real effects.
That's the saving grace again of
That's right.
that solves the conundrum of if one of the challenging statements in the course is, if this were the real world, God would be cruel. And to me, the beauty of that is that implies that this isn't the real world, and God isn't cruel,
Right.
and the way out of it is available to us. But we need to avail ourselves of it. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is leading us in the direction finally that we really do want to go.
Exactly. So the fifth comment here is, on a more general level, A Course in Miracles is distinguished from New Age thought systems in that it draws upon traditional Freudian psychoanalytic principles, for example, denial and projection, and within philosophical and spiritual contexts, upon the Neoplatonic tradition and themes common to early Christianity and the Gnostic systems of the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Our book, Love Does Not Condemn, The World, the Flesh, and the Devil, according to Platonism, Christianity, Gnosticism, and A Course in Miracles, provides an in-depth exploration of these themes. Chapter 19 is especially helpful in understanding these conflicts. Well, in the email that I shared with you, I put I'm reading about 2 pages a day on average.
I have the book, and I need to do the same thing.
Yeah, it's a kind of a slow scholarly read. I think it's Ken's probably most scholarly book, and it's very well written because Ken did it, and he obviously did tons of research and really knows what he's talking about, and really pulls together a whole bunch of stuff historically in terms of the world's thinking.
Sure.
And it's a fascinating read. At the same time, it's probably not
a beach read.
not a beach read, and probably not the first, and probably close to the last book I would recommend, which is kind of strange to say, of books that Ken wrote for particularly a newbie course student, or even someone who studied the course a while. It really wants more understanding of, anyway, but I'm just reading because Ken wrote it, and he says some good things in it, and each page does have things that trigger reminders, like what the curriculum's about. But it's a pretty scholarly book, and rather scholarly book, and so I would recommend just about any other book of Ken's for most people.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, definitely, and Ken has all those little books that are from his seminars and stuff.
Those are great.
Those are great for really getting some punchy meat of the course.
Exactly.
ideas.
Exactly.
And I mean, this one, is really important too. Again, it goes back to that idea that the Course gives us that the psychological dynamics of the ego,
Right.
and using Freudian psychoanalytic principles, but that we're all sort of in Western culture somewhat familiar with. We all sort of know, even if we don't completely understand it fully from the Freudian point of view, what projection is, and what we have some idea of what the ego is, and so it's helpful to us to use those dynamics. The Course uses them in a much more a deeper and more profound way than Freud did, and really talking about that the root problem is not sexuality, but really this guilt that we feel over believing that we're separate from God. It's much broader and deeper than Freud had the right dynamics and mechanics down, but that the real problem goes much deeper. And once you start really understanding what the Course is saying, and then practicing this and watching it in yourself, which is part of the journey of A Course in Miracles, it's so obvious what you're doing all the time. So
yeah.
and that's part of the process, is the ego hides in concealment, Ken used to say, and so we want to make that process very transparent to ourselves, so that we can't, we're not just robotically doing it.
Right. And I think one of my favorite lines in the Course for reminding myself that it's not it's not easy, but it's simple. And the simplicity, I think, comes to the fore whenever I remember to just look at how I feel. There's places in the text that just say, "How do you feel in any given moment?"
Right.
And then tying into that is that fifth stage in the development of trust in the back of the book, the Manual for Teachers, that says, this would be difficult indeed if each step were not so heavily reinforced, or something like that. Paraphrasing again, but I think that's really helpful. It's like every moment, if we're not at peace, we have that place in our mind, which we put a label of Holy Spirit or Jesus or kindness teacher, whatever works for you, and that is always available 24/7, 365, like an 800 number in our mind. It's like just pick up that inner phone. It's like, okay, I'm not at peace.
The teacher built in,
Exactly.
And if we don't want to do it, then we have to take responsibility for that too. I just think we don't want to do it right now.
Right.
And sometimes that's part of the process too.
It absolutely. Years ago, I was working with a wonderful teacher named Leonard Lasco, and when I lived in Ashland, Oregon, and attended a lot of his workshops. And one of the things that he did, which were workshops on forgiveness, even though he wasn't a course teacher per se, he shared something I thought was very helpful. He says, if you can't forgive yourself for what you're experiencing, perhaps you can look at your resistance and forgive that resistance. Forgive yourself for resisting. And I thought that's really very helpful. Another thing I wanted to add in this last fifth point, that since Ken was steeped in Freudian psychoanalytic theory, and that was his bread and butter, and his psychologist, I think if another person writing this had been a modern physicist, they would say, same thing. This is not tearing down anything that's established and working. It's taking existing foundations that we have that are making inroads into understanding the mind. And modern physics would say, again, drawing on Eastern mysticism, even and as well as the Heisenberg's uncertainty, and certainly quantum entanglement, and some of the insights from modern physics suggest that there's no out there. And that's a direct quote from John Wheeler, a physicist who has inherited the mysticism of several generations of modern physics before him, and. And I think one of those early luminaries in the physics world said, if modern physics, if quantum theory hasn't profoundly shocked you, you haven't understood it yet. Meaning that there's only one thing, and of course the academia won't go to the place where it's all unconscious guilt that Ken goes to, but
Right.
but
And they
but
really haven't made the connection with,
exactly,
yeah, with
exactly,
what's the cause, and
right, right,
that's where the course is very different.
exactly.
I think that there are, yeah, that's very true.
However, even though they don't take it to that level, there's almost universal, if not begrudging, acceptance of the fact that you can no longer ignore mind. The dual double slit experiment and the wave particle duality basically
Mhm. And that
once and
there's
for all
something else going on here.
decided no, you can't
Yeah.
separate mind from the equation. Mind is an integral part of what appears to happen in the world. And
Right.
so with that understanding, and with things like quantum entanglement, where you have two qubits, for example, that could be separated by galaxies, and the state of one qubit will change
Mm.
instantaneously, not at the speed of light or 100 times. It's like there's space and time are questioned by that whole
Right.
premise. Yeah,
Right.
the whole notion that separation is real
Right.
is being challenged. It's being undermined
And
from
certainly space and time. The whole
yeah, space time is an illusory fabric that is woven into a naked emperor's clothing, and like Ken says, there's no emperor.
again, from the course's perspective, it's just it's that would concur with that and just say that the kind use of time, we made it up to play out the ego's thought system,
Right.
as if there were some sort of linear continuum.
Hmm.
But the kind use of time, the Holy Spirit's use of time, is to use it right now as a present practice of forgiveness to get us
Exactly.
back to the mind,
Exactly.
um, and so that would embrace our past and future thoughts, and because that's really, we're always reacting because we believe we sinned in the past, or we're really only reacting to the past.
Hmm. Hmm.
There is no real present here, and out of fear, future dread of what our punishment is going to be. So the practice of forgiveness is to be very present, or as present as we can consciously be, and to say, right now, I have a choice of which teacher I want to choose. I can take my reaction. I can realize that the cause of my anger right now is not what you just said to me. It was a choice that I already made in the mind. I must have felt
Was that
guilty.
upsetting what I just said to you?
I
I just messed
don't know. I can't remember. I'm too present.
I couldn't resist it.
I'm sure. But as soon as we get off of this, that within, I guarantee. Well, let's make a bet. Within a half an hour, I bet you we get an email or a phone call or something that's gonna, we're gonna get to practice.
And we'll be joyously
Yeah,
heavy quotes on
it'll
the
be another wonderful opportunity, right? Because
participating in level of confusion and the ego's magic, and that will be our next opportunity to forgive ourselves. Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I think we probably have talked enough for now.
I think so. I think we
it's a
covered it
good
pretty well.
topic,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
For a start, anyway. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, thanks as always, Susan. I always enjoy our conversations, and it helps remind me that I could be more mindful and gentle with myself. And
Yeah.
so hopefully other people listening might find it helpful too. So anyway, you can always find Susan's wonderful writing on foraysinforgiveness.com. And I also share similar kinds of content on acimblog.com. So thanks again, and look forward to the next conversation.
Thank you.